Welcome to Black Republican, Black Democrat. I'll be your host tonight. Co-host. I'm sorry.
Just the host?
Yeah, I forgot you was in the room. Co-host, Jamar.
I'm your other co-host, AK Kamara. How you doing, man?
Well, I'm not gonna complain, and then if I do, who the hell's gonna listen? So, that's not what the show is about. It's not me complaining about how the hell I feel. But, I feel pretty decent though. Yeah,
You've had a good week so far. You didn't, catch the vid.
Yeah, I did not catch as everyone calls it in the hood, Rona. I did not. Well, let me knock wood. But what I've been doing is working with an organization that's been giving out free testing for the coronavirus, mobile and walk-up testing spots, and we're trying to create other spots so that folks can have the opportunity to come get tested, rapid test, 10 minutes, and you find out whether you're positive or negative. And it's actually been pretty interesting to see it and to be able to do it. So, that's been my week so far.
Hey, man, you're out there and you're in the community. I think obviously whenever you talk about COVID and we get lost in some of these different conversations, but making sure that if people are feeling a certain sort of way, maybe you got runny nose, sniffles, and you want to go get tested just to make sure that you don't have it, or if you do have it, so you can take the appropriate steps. That's a good thing. So if you don't have enough tests going on, that's not a great thing. So having the mobile unit, that's pretty big deal, man.
And if you feel that way, if you feel sick and all that, stay your ass at home. Don't come around other folks, getting them sick. Okay. So stay at home. But you're also welcome to come to one of our mobile spaces and get tested rapidly and find out whether you are infecting your family or you're okay. But seriously, we're going to have on in a bit here the creator and organizer of the mobile COVID hot. I shouldn't say hotspot. I'm trying to rename it. COVID. Mobile testing.
Yeah.
So, she could tell everything about how and the need for it, right? Because I've seen some of the long lines that people have been. One of my Facebook friends posted. Oh, I know him personally, but one of my Facebook friends posted that during lunch yesterday, he went to get a test and was in line. Spent this whole lunch hour in line and didn't even get tested. They ran out.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. That's a trip to me more than anything. We're almost 2 years into this pandemic, and they don't have enough tests. Like, what is going on? There's so many questions because it can't just be federal, right? At the state level, you got to be able to ask Walls or even some of the different city and council, like why weren't you prepared? I get it that Omicron came through and it's far more infectious and everything like that than the other variants were. But the fact that they weren't prepared, it feels like a trip to me. But, we'll kind of talk about that. I know that today there was some breaking news later in the day that Minneapolis and St. Paul are both instituting vaccine passports for basically eating establishments. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But, a topic that's been near and dear to our heart, considering that we film this show in Minneapolis every Wednesday, and we've talked about crime quite a bit. And we've had people running for Hennepin County Sheriff. And today we have a great guest that's joining us. It's a friend of the show who's been on before to talk about some of these legal matters. But we have Mary Moriarty on.
Yes.
And she's joining us today, and she has actually announced that she's running for Hennepin County Attorney. So there's, I think, going to be some great conversation about what that looks like.
Yeah.
I know that you and we have some very differing opinions when it comes to crime.
We do?
In regards to prosecution and things like that. So without further ado, Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You're our resident legal scholar around here, throughout every trial. And so actually we definitely going to call on you now that they're having the federal trial of the other three officers that that were prosecuted as well as Chauvin in the George Floyd case. This is so. In fact, just one question about that. This is the case. This federal case this is because they're being charged with violating his civil rights, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so with those charges, they can all face life sentences because if they're convicted of violating his civil rights. How do you just simply charge someone with violation of a civil rights? Are there specific laws that had to be violated in order to charge someone with violating one's civil rights? How does that work, Mary?
Yes, it's a little more complicated than state court where we have statutes. They're charged with violating his civil rights by doing specific things. As I recall, and I haven't looked at the federal complaint for a while, but part of it is failure to render aid. I think the charges were based on Fourth Amendment violations. So if you're violating somebody's civil rights and you're charged in federal court, it has to be based on a constitutional right that's been violated by law enforcement. One of the constitutional rights is your Fourth Amendment. So that's why they sound different than murder, something like that. And federal court, interestingly, I don't think people know this, but they could actually be facing the death penalty under this particular section under which they're charged. They're not going to, but the penalty can be pretty steep. So there's a lot of risk for them to go to trial. And if they happen to be convicted,
if they're convicted of death, what would they do? Ship them off to Utah or someplace to go fry them? I mean, how does that work there?
No, so the federal, we don't have the death penalty in Minnesota, but this is the federal system. They're not going to seek the death penalty, and so it's really irrelevant. But it's just interesting that if one was convicted under this particular section, you could face the death penalty. But they're kind of phasing out the death penalty in federal court as they are in many states.
Wow.
Mary, last time you were on, we had just a little bit of time to kind of talk about some issues that were, some aspects, I guess, of crime in law, right? And you've announced that you're running for Hennepin County Attorney, correct? So,
yes.
Tell me a little bit, and also the audience, what made you want to run? Tell us a little bit about your background. We know who you are, but kind of tell us a little bit about why you want to run.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So I was Hennepin County Public Defender for 31 years. And for the first 22 of those years, I tried criminal cases. So I probably tried about 13 murder cases. I know my way around a courtroom really well. I teach trial skills and trial practice to lawyers across the country and also to students at the University of Minnesota Law School. I was also chair of the Behavioral Health Committee in Hennepin County, which means I worked with suburban police and sheriff and MPD, prosecutors, social workers, about trying to find options for people who were struggling with mental health and substance abuse disorder. My stepsister died of an accidental overdose 30 years ago. She was on some medication and she drank some alcohol and died. And so that's always been a particular interest to me, to figure out what we can do to help people who are struggling with addiction. And locking them up is really not the road to recovery. I was also chief public defender for 6 years, and I had the opportunity to manage a large law office of over 120 lawyers. Public defender's office is the second largest public law office in the state, and the county attorney's office is actually the largest. The National Center for State Courts did a study on us. They're an independent entity. They came back in 2019 and said we were one of the best public defenders' offices in the country. So I was not reappointed as chief public defender for reasons I could go into. I could have gone back as a line public defender, meaning trying cases, but I decided to retire. And so I thought, okay, I've got experience in management and criminal law. I did a lot of commentary on the Chauvin case for MSNBC and BBC and Almanac. Yeah, all of that. And I thought I have a real passion for racial equity and also system reform, what can I do with that experience? How can I give back to the community? Because I've always been in public service. And even though this is an elected position, I'm not a politician. I'm not using it as a stepping stone for anything else. I think it's just a really critical position. It's contributed to mass incarceration and huge racial disparities. And there are many things that we can do to keep people safe and also have justice in the community and to try to rehabilitate people. So those are the reasons I decided to run.
So, but let's call a spade a spade. Were you not reappointed because you, as you just said, one of the things that are near and dear to your heart is race equity, right? Mm-hmm. And you called out a lot of the BS that was going on that you've seen with sentences and treatment of black and brown men and women versus their white counterparts. You were very avid and called that out very loud with that. So, I mean, I don't know if you can, but I'm definitely going to say that I think that was certainly one of the reasons why you weren't reappointed. Do you think so?
Oh, there's no doubt. In fact, they suspended me because they said that I called a justice partner, and that's the term they used, a racist in public. And what had happened was there was a bail forum. There were many, many people in the audience, and it was put on by the Minneapolis Foundation. And I was just in the audience. I wasn't part of a panel, but there was a prosecutor on the panel. The state public defender was also on the panel. And the prosecutor started referring to people who were held pretrial as thugs. And he kept saying that over and over and over. And there was a very large audience, and I was looking around, and everybody, have you ever been in a big crowd and everybody's kind of looking around, nobody's paying attention anymore, and they're like, what's up with this guy, kind of thing. And I happened to be sitting at a table with friends of mine, one of whom is a black woman, who looked at me and said, "You got your people." And I said, "Yep, I've got it." And that, I, over the years, have come to understand the importance of speaking out in situations as a white woman, or I'm just being complicit in what's going on.
Absolutely.
So I waited until the Q&A, and I asked for a microphone. And I knew this prosecutor, and all I really thought about was, well, how can I say this in a way he might be able to hear it? He's kind of a hothead. And so what I said was, "I'm asking you to rethink your use of the word thug. It's racially charged." And he lost his mind. I mean, he started screaming into the microphone, saying really horrible things. The organizer had to grab a microphone and run up to the stage and tell him to stop what he was saying and take a deep breath. And that was kind of the end of the panel. And then I was out in the hallway during a break talking to somebody, and that prosecutor came up on me and was very close to my face. His face was all red. He was screaming at me, "You didn't have to do me like that. You and I can never work together again." And he had to be dragged away from me by two people from the Minneapolis Foundation. And I was really shaken up. But there were never any consequences to him. And then I was accused of calling a justice partner a racist in public. So, yeah, that was part of it. It was also part of it that I was arguing for salary parity for our staff with prosecutors. And the state public defender didn't like that. So it was, when I came back after I was suspended, what I was told that I had to do was to get along better with my justice partners. And they consider my justice partners to be judges and prosecutors. And I do not. My job, I was actually told by the head of public safety in the county that I was to consider myself part of the county family, and I was not to be speaking publicly about things that happened in the family. And I, as chief public defender, that was not my job. I doubt that anyone in Hennepin County thinks that should be my job. Certainly, my job is to make sure that our clients are represented as well as they can be, and that I am speaking out about issues that harm them, that need to be changed. So Yeah, I mean, those were the main issues.
If you're elected county attorney, I think that one thing that folks was always pissed off about Freeman is they thought that Freeman, a lot of people called him a pure racist, but we know that factually there are black and brown men and women are charged differently than their white counterparts. How do you, if you're elected, how do you go about changing that? Do you look at cases differently? I mean, because let's be real. If you're looking at lens through not maybe your legal eyes, but maybe your, I'd say street eyes, your common sense eyes, sometimes you can look at a case and say, okay, he or she is being overcharged. And one of the reasons he or she is being overcharged is probably because she's black or white, or excuse me, because she's black or brown. And if he or she has an addiction, that definitely is going to be, you're going to be jailed for your addiction instead of treatment. How does one, and we thought Freeman didn't care. So how do you go about changing the aspects of what a county attorney looks like and bringing some equity back into the system?
Yeah, I care very deeply about that. And, you know, many times actually people don't really understand the power that the county attorney has. For instance, they decide whether somebody should be charged. I mean, it doesn't matter what the police bring them. They don't have to charge that person. They can, they don't have to. They decide what to charge them with. They decide whether to ask for bail or not. They decide whether to send them or offer them diversion. They decide what to offer them. And so in very many respects, whether a person enters the system or not is really dependent on subjective decision-making by the prosecutor. And what happens to them as they go through the system is very dependent on subjective decision-making by the prosecutor. And just like all decisions that are subjective, we know everybody has unconscious bias. And so I would expect that there would be racial disparities in there. And so what I would do is work, and I know that there are a couple of organizations that do this across the country, is work and look at the decision points for prosecutors, like all of those things that I mentioned, and look at them to see whether there are racial disparities that are being exacerbated. We know that racial disparities come in the door. That's a different issue. That's a working with police and, you know, why do we have all these black and brown men and women coming in on drug cases when we know that white people actually use drugs at a slightly higher rate. But in terms of the prosecutor's office, the goal is not to make that worse. And I suspect that they do simply because they're subjective decision. And there was a study out of Wisconsin that said that prosecutors actually offer white clients better offers than black clients. So what I would do is take a look at that. And if there are, and I would expect there were racial disparities, that we put in place things that will prevent that. Some of the things you can do are try to remove identifying features. For instance, the address, you know, where this happened, the name.
Okay. What do you mean, Mary? Can you kind of...
Okay, sorry about that. So you know how, let me give you an example. You might have heard about these studies where they'll take a resume and one resume will be Mike. It'll be the same resume, but one will be Mike Jones and the other will be Jamal something or another.
Yeah, yes.
And everything else is the same. And they give them to employers and Mike gets many more offers than Jamal, right? So what we need to do when prosecutors get police reports, one thing that we could try to do is remove identifying information like the names of people, the address, to try to remove that kind of information, that biasing information.
That's legal? You can do that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, so the idea here is to take away that information that might create that implicit bias and see what the decision would be made if, you know, instead of Jamal, or so I'm just using that, and it was Michael, who lived, you know, in the
I was just about to say versus area. Exactly Edina. Michael lives in Edina versus Jamal, who lives in North Minneapolis. If you're saying if we take away his area of living, address, and maybe name, and just look at the case, it might be charged differently. Well,
that's what you want to see.
Okay.
You know, that's what you want to study and say, okay, So we're seeing this issue, we need to remove the names, or we need to do this because that is producing a biased result.
Interesting.
So,
you know, Mary, I'm going to kind of cut right into the chase. Obviously, I'm a Republican.
No,
I'm a conservative.
Just a little bit.
And what I'm kind of curious about is we want, I say Republicans, conservatives, and I don't think it's just us, but we want things to be safe, right? We want our community to be safe. We don't want people running around and hurting other people, right? And I've been very critical of different prosecutors, county prosecutors, state prosecutors, that I think there's a line in which you want to, let's say, cure an ill that you perceive, right? And I'm not trying to make it as though it doesn't exist, that there's not disparity, but that one of the ways that some of these prosecutors is that they're saying, if you have a pretextual stop, any charges that came from that pretextual stop, like John Choi said, you wouldn't charge as the county attorney. But the pushback from the right and from conservatives, Republicans says, well, then if you're not putting people in jail and saying this is a state statute, this is a county statute, then why do you get to choose who gets charged and who doesn't? If you break the law, then this happens. So I guess I want to ask you, for you, if you're elected county attorney, what do you do to make sure that law is being upheld, that people that are committing crimes aren't able to harm other people? Minneapolis, obviously, and Hennepin County have a very large increase in all types of crimes. I know that things are kind of going in that direction. They've been kind of peaking up. Back in the 90s, it was really high, and then a lot of crime has been going down, and now there's kind of been this peak in the last couple of years. So for you, how do you see yourself as a prosecutor? Is that something you're going to take a charge like John Choi, or like out in San Francisco? I can't remember the DA out there.
Chase Boudin.
Yeah. Are those things that are important to you? And if so, how do you square those pegs and make sure that there's not more crime being committed?
So a lot of different questions in there.
There is a lot.
What I'm going to say first is that sometimes I feel historically that Republicans have kind of jumped on we're the public safety people. And I'm going to reject that. Democrats care about public safety. I care about public safety. My mother lives in Bloomington.
Damn right
I don't want her to be carjacked. But here's the deal. The approaches have been different. Well, and I will actually say, so the Republican approach and the Democratic approach, we haven't been much better at this, frankly, is punishment. Put people in prison for as long as possible. And what we know is that doesn't work to keep us safer. So what I believe in public safety, but I have different ideas about how to keep us safe that are actually research-based. They're based in evidence. They work in other cities. And so I want to invest in those approaches, which I believe will keep us safe, not just the punishment aspect of it, because that hasn't done it, and we've seen that. I like your question. Thank you for the question about the pretext stops. So I like that question because I do get that a lot when people say, well, why can't people follow the law? Why, should we just not, how can you just decide not to enforce certain laws? That's actually the discretion of the prosecutor is to decide whether to charge certain cases. And what I want to say about traffic stops is this, and I don't think people really think about this very much. Police officers tell us that they can follow us within blocks or a mile, and they can find a reason to pull us over because the traffic code is so specific. You have to signal your turn a certain number of feet before the intersection. And I want to ask you this: how many people do you see with objects hanging from their rearview mirrors? And if you have an object hanging from your rearview mirror and it's obstructing your view, you're technically breaking the law, right? But we know that police exercise tremendous discretion in rarely pulling people over for hanging objects like the air freshener And so police are exercising their discretion all the time.
All the time.
And the problem with the pretext stops, and this is of a particular, I've done a lot of research on this. I'm endlessly fascinated by it. When I was chief public defender, our office pulled data because the MPD does have a very transparent data dashboard. And you look at the dashboard on stops, and you can see that there are very, very large racial disparities. Now, what I always got in, yes, there are racial disparities, but sometimes people would say, well, that's because Black people have more guns or drugs or, what have you, or it's a good use of police resources to get guns off the streets or what have you. So we asked for additional data from MPD, and they gave us about a 19,000 line spreadsheet, and somebody other than me crunched the numbers. And here's what we found. That a Black driver who was pulled over for an equipment violation or a minor traffic violation, who was then searched at much higher rates than white drivers were, they found a gun in less than half of 1% of the cases. Less than half.
Less than half.
Yeah, less than half of 1%.
So I'm glad you said that, Mary, because we have this conversation all the time that's a real stat that more Black folks, Black and brown folks, are pulled over than their white counterparts, especially depending on the city that they're in, and it's harassment, and that you rarely find anything in these vehicles. That's just a fact.
So the question that I have, based off of what you're saying, and I've looked at some of the information that you are right that the majority of these don't produce, but on the ones that do, I guess the question is, when that then goes away, what does that do? Is there enough data to show that when you get rid of that there's not a tailspin? And then there's a second part to my question that you mentioned. When you said that a prosecutor, especially a county prosecutor or city prosecutor, they get to use their discretion on what they charge. Is that correct? What charges they bring?
Yes.
My question is from like a legislative branch, or we'll call it different branches of government. If the state legislators get together and they pass this law and they say, here's our law, and the judicial branch is supposed to say we're enforcing or prosecuting this law, when you say that you have the discretion, is that an adversarial relationship? I guess if all the legislators get together and they say, if you are driving without a seatbelt, you should get a ticket, and as the county attorney, you say, we're not going to charge people with this violation. I don't know if that's if that's something you could do or not, but I'm just wondering, like, how do you kind of square that? So those I know are two different questions, but the first one is, even in that 1/2 of 1%, if that then happens, what type of harm will that have if there's data? And then, like I said, the second question.
Yeah. So the answer to the first question in my mind is this. I like to look at it as, even though I said 1/2 of 1%, I like to look at it as 99.5% of Black drivers were stopped and searched and had to endure that search when they had nothing. And I can only imagine right now the potential trauma that a Black driver has to go through, wondering what that interaction is going to be like. I mean, you guys could tell me obviously better than I would know, but I certainly heard from people that is a very emotional, potentially traumatic situation. And even worse than that, it can be emotional and traumatic, because that's where, if you're going to have a bad outcome with police, it's probably likely to happen there. And we've seen that over and over and over, right? So one thing I would say about that is, people bring up the Timothy McVeigh. They talk about that all the time, the Oklahoma City bomber, and they say, oh, he was pulled over on a traffic stop. What if he hadn't been pulled over on that? Would we have ever found him? And I think the truth on that is they did have a really good idea of who it was, probably would have found him.
Correct.
But we always have to balance things in society. And on the off chance that, okay, so we're missing a couple of guns that somebody might have had in a car. Is that worth it to those 99.5% of Black drivers who were put through this exercise where they know they were profiled? And I say they know they were profiled because we know they're pulled over at astronomically higher rates. And we know that they get pulled over for stuff like hanging objects from your rearview mirror when lots of people have hanging objects from their rearview mirror. So that's one of the issues I have. And the other one misperception too is this does not stop, like the pretext stops. The definition of a pretext stop is the courts have said, we will not look at your intent if you can articulate a reason why you pulled this person over. But here's the deal. If you pull somebody over because their bumper is falling off and you go tell them that, and you are addressing the fact that their bumper is falling off, that's not a pretext stop. In fact, I'm not necessarily a fan of picking off certain types of offenses and just saying that police can't pull people over for those things, because I know that police will just find something else if they really want to pull them over. And maybe, like if you said you can't pull people over in equipment violations, there's sometimes when there are equipment violations that are dangerous, and you might want police pulling somebody over to say, hey, your rear lights are out, and somebody might run into you. So, but the key to me is that the reason the police are using it, this doesn't stop them from seeing somebody weave on the road and pulling them over and smelling alcohol and then doing the test for DWI. It doesn't stop any of that. I'll also say and add to that one of the reasons that police do pretext stops is because if they have a legal right to search someone, they can do it. They don't need the permission of the driver, but they often do it because they want to ask consent of the driver. And I used to be of the mind that, well, okay, consent has to be voluntary and knowing. So what cops should do is just have this on body cam and go through a form. And I was told by many people in the community that even though many of them didn't know they had that right, but even those who did just were afraid to exercise it. So it never felt voluntary. So I would probably put in place a policy where that police shouldn't ask for consent. And if they do, then I wouldn't prosecute what they found. And that's perfectly appropriate. Or let me put it this way. I think you're asking me, is exercising that kind of discretion okay? And it is. I wish I'd known. So I should look up sometimes. There are some really bizarre laws that the legislature has passed that people don't know about because they're just not enforced anymore because they're ridiculous. And I can't even tell you how ridiculous they are. I'll have to look up some. But there are just laws that are still on the books that make no sense whatsoever. And I think prosecutors do get to take a look at racial disparities. They get to take a look at how can we limit some of these police interactions with residents that we know very often can be dangerous for both police and the person in the car without really taking away police's ability to stop people for DWI. Or if they pull somebody over because they have an equipment violation and they walk up to the car and they see a gun in the car, that's fine. That's legal. It's just the fishing expeditions that I'm concerned about because it does target Black drivers.
Damn right it does.
So one of the kind of the aspects that I'm curious, kind of hearing you talk this through, is it that your goal, we'll call it twofold. One, I genuinely believe that you want to help do your part to solve these racial disparities. I don't question that belief, because it sounds like you're very convicted in that. But the question is, when you have unintended consequences, the people to me that suffer the most are people that live in the community, right? So, you know, if you're living in North Minneapolis, you're living in South Minneapolis, and let's say one of the unintended consequences is that people that understand that there are certain aspects that will allow them to operate in a way that allows them, you know, to break laws and things like that. And I'm talking about people from, I guess, Realville, right? When you live in outside of the law, right, and you live in a life of criminality, you understand what the rules are and you operate in that, right? And the people that get impacted to me the most are people that are in the community that have nothing to do with that. Like, I think the stat is something like in Minneapolis, 95% of the residents don't commit any crimes. It's only like 3 to 5% that are really, really bad, that do a lot of really nasty things. And I know that might be way over exaggeration, but I know it's a small number of people that actually commit crimes in a community. And when you get this perception that like crime is crazy, right? When we talk about all these murders in Minneapolis, you're thinking that like every other person you pass is a murderer or something. But the truth is the vast majority of the community. So, you know, when I think of Chesed Bowden out in San Francisco, and thank you for reminding me of the name, are the unintended consequences for some of those actions to try and find a cure to that disparity, are the unintended consequences that people in those communities end up, you know, falling victim to the experiment that people take advantage of things, you know? And I guess that's one question that I have for you is, what if you're wrong, right? Like, what if your intention to do this ends up not doing what you want to do? How do you feel about that? Or do you feel that's at a point where you have to try something because what's working in your mind right now doesn't work?
So I spent a lot of time in North Minneapolis driving, and I don't ever believe that even if I have the stop sign or a stoplight that somebody's going to stop. I mean, I have seen crazy driving behavior there, dangerous driving behavior, and actually people have been killed by drivers. And so I always tell people, we're talking about pretext stops. I think law enforcement or whoever we would assign to do it, there needs to be enforcement of dangerous driving behavior. That's completely different. We cannot have people blowing through stop signs the way we do. I was up at Broadway and Lyndale at a stoplight. I was in the right lane sitting there, and some SUV comes up in the parking lane and just goes right through the red light. You know, and anybody driving up there, and not just up there too, experiences that kind of behavior because they think there's no enforcement, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And I've been on Lyndale, standing there. I was at a memorial, and there were these trucks going 80. There must have been 80 miles an hour up and down Lyndale going. It was ridiculous. There were all kinds of pedestrians there, and so we have to make it clear that kind of behavior is not okay, and that kind of behavior, there will be enforcement of dangerous driving behavior. But that is one of the reasons why I resist saying you can't stop somebody for, like, if you said all equipment violations, because those can be dangerous. What I'd like actually is if there's an equipment violation, that a cop pulls somebody over and gives them the voucher to go fix it. But when you take a whole category of reasons for police to stop people away, I understand why people would say that's just going to encourage people to engage in that kind of behavior. That's why I just talk about pretext stops in general. There's nothing wrong with a police officer who's actually stopping somebody really for the reason that they're stopping them. What I want to avoid is the stopping them and just claiming that's the reason, but they're really doing the fishing expedition.
All the time.
So
that's out of Realville. What she's saying is that's out of Realville.
Yeah, there's actually one last question. I know I have all these questions, but it's good to be able to have you on that have this different mindset. So I'm not just like shouting on Facebook at random people and saying, hey, blah, blah, blah. So the last question is the relationship that you have with law enforcement, right? If you take certain steps, do you think that it will create an adversary relationship where, you hear these stories of officer says, this is what happened. I know this beat, this is a real bad dude, whatever, but maybe it violates this, and you say, listen, this is what I told you, this is what our office can do. We're not going to charge us, or we're not going to do this. I know that there already exists that relationship, right? Like prosecutors can say we're not going to charge us, and the police officers might say this is BS. But do you think that taking that firmer stance and almost kind of coming from the point of view that there is deep systemic racism, and that you are in a way, I know you're not going to say this directly, and because you probably don't believe it, but in a way you're saying that there is racial bias that is deeply ingrained, and that your intention or goal is to stop this disparity, and that to tighten the margins so it doesn't, you can't go and look and see that there's big disparities. But does that create a more adversarial relationship where cops might say, well, yeah, this prosecutor thinks that we're all racist and that every stop that we do. So how do you deal with that relationship? Because it sounds like what you want to do is you want to stop a bad culture. And maybe that's a unfair way for me to state it, but that's what it kind of seems like.
It isn't, though, actually. And I will be really honest about that. I mean, everybody has unconscious bias. We really do. And I have... So I'm going to give you an example. So about 6-7 years ago, the Minneapolis Police Department was undergoing its national initiative training. They were having implicit bias training and procedural justice training. And I invited myself to go. And so it was me and 20 cops one Saturday. And I was at a table with a lieutenant. And right before we started, and everybody knew who I was, he said, "This is fucking bullshit and a fucking waste of my fucking time." And he sabotaged, that's a quote, and he sabotaged everything we did. But this was what was interesting. At the end of the day, they said to everybody, "What are your goals for the next year?" And he stood up and he said, "I want to maintain the warrior mentality because that's why I became a cop." And I realized this is the problem. It is a culture. It's not a bad apple thing. It's a culture thing, because you can train, you can hire great cops, and I do believe there are good cops. Okay, I've worked with them, and I know good cops don't want the bad cops that don't do their job, because they make their job harder. So what we need to do is, and this may have partially happened through attrition because of all the police that left, but it's that mid-level management that, you can recruit really fine officers with lived experience who want to be a guardian, that kind of thing. You can train them. But then when they're out in the street with somebody like that, who signed up for the war on drugs, and they're saying, just forget everything you were taught, that's where it's hard to change the culture. So it is a cultural thing. There are a lot of aspects of race in it, but I'm not, and I know exactly what you're saying, because I have had cops say, "What do you think, we're all racist?" I actually, there's a law review article about implicit bias in public defender triage. And when I was chief public defender, I sent that out to our office, and I got some emails that said, "Are you telling me I'm a racist?" So talking about race here in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, is exceptionally hard.
Yeah, you got these passive aggressive white folks that don't want to talk about it,
right,
because they don't want to be called racist, or think that, or know that they're complicit in the racism.
So what I try to do is focus on impact, and that's why I like data. So, and I have had this conversation with cops. I have said, okay, let's sit down and look at the data. And so you've got these huge racial disparities. You're getting guns in less than 0.5% of the time. Like, let's just forget about intent. You're good. Let's just say, you're a good guy. You're not intentionally doing this. Is this a problem? Do you think that this is a problem? And I think if they're being honest, if the goal is to create trusting relationships in the community, you've got to say it's a problem. So then you say, well, how do we fix this? What can we do about it? So I am willing to work with police. I've worked with them quite a bit, but I'm also going to be really honest with them. For instance, I'll give you a real-time example here. You've probably heard police chiefs talking about carjackings, but also attributing some of the blame to Mike Freeman's bail policy. You've probably heard that. So
yeah, the bail fund where, or, you know, like
Not
you
the-
let not the fund, but you get out and then they go back and they reoffend, right?
Yes,
That type of thing.
yes.
So it's like cashless bail or whatever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I was talking to a police chief, and she was saying this is a problem, and she said, I haven't seen the bail policy, but my understanding is that he's letting violent people out without bail. And I said, I have seen the policy, and there are 19 types of cases on it. They're all property crimes. There isn't a single violent offense on there, and they're all first-time offenses. And I remember at the time when it came out at the public defender's office, we kind of laughed because there wasn't a single thing on there that the person wouldn't have gotten out without bail anyway. I mean, and some of them were like lottery fraud. None of us had ever represented anybody on a lottery fraud. The only thing on there that sounds familiar would be a car theft. But that's not a carjacking or a weapon, or it's you leave your car someplace and somebody steals it.
That's why it's time for his ass
On
to
a
go.
first-time car offense, Freeman's bail policy is that they will not ask for bail. So that's the only thing it applies to. And so I said to this police chief, so that's not it. You know, and unfortunately, 3 days later, I think I saw her at a press conference saying the same thing. And so I'm willing to listen to police, and I want to partner with them because there isn't a simple answer to the rise in gun violence or carjackings, but there are plenty of strategies. But to get at the strategies and to be able to partner with the police, you have to be talking about what the actual problems are. And saying it's something that it really isn't about isn't going to get us anywhere. There is a problem with the rise in carjackings and people don't feel safe. There are strategies of dealing with that, but we have to talk honestly about it. And that's where I would be pushing police to say, hey, let's stop talking about the bail policy because we know that isn't the issue. We do know it's an issue, by the way, that people on car thefts, kids, are getting out and they're not getting services right away. They're having to wait about 6 months. And so you've got a kid on a car theft waiting 6 months to get services. And what are they doing but probably going out and committing another car theft? And there is something the county attorney's office can do about that.
Mary, I only got a few more minutes here with you. We got some questions for you real quick too, but I've got 2 short questions for you that will you make a concerted effort if you're when elected, because I believe you will when elected, will you make a concerted effort to bring in more black prosecutors and more black public defenders? And do you know the number of black public defenders that are currently in the office now?
So I would have no control over public defenders. That's the office I used to lead. And unfortunately, many of the black public defenders I hired have left. So I don't know how many are still there. Yes, representation does matter. But one thing I have noticed is that it's not just representation. It's sometimes what I want are people who have had lived experiences or they understand poverty. I mean, there are people who have privilege, who don't understand some of the issues. I want people who understand or are willing to be trained on trauma. And I'm just going to give you this example. There's a great book by James Foreman Jr. called Locking Up Our Own. And it's about Washington, D.C. He's actually the son of James Foreman Sr., who was one of the founders of SNCC. And he was a public defender for a while. And he writes about what was going on in Washington, D.C. And he was talking about, studies about whether when they recruited black police officers that was helpful. And it actually was not. What they found was that the black police officers, some of them treated people worse than white officers. Because, I want to be really honest. Yes, representation matters, and that is something I would be looking for, but it's representation plus the understanding and the willingness to look and deal with trauma and not see, as many prosecutors I think do, this binary, there's a perpetrator and there's a victim that has to be pristine, stereotypical. That's not life. Lots of people come into the system with trauma, both victims and people who have victimized others. And so I want people that understand that or are willing to be trained on that. So the answer is yes.
No, I actually, and that's one of the reasons why I strongly support you, because of what you just said exactly. And I guess you can't say it the way I'm gonna say it. Is the fact that you're right. Just because you're black doesn't mean you're for black folks, right? That you'll do right in the right thing by black folks or brown folks. But like I said, if you have those with not just the education and the degrees, but the lived experiences of knowing that their cultural differences, and knowing how to deal with folks that doesn't look like them, or recognizing the fact that this person suffers from an addiction and needs to be dealt with before anything else, or there's generational trauma, something of that nature. So what you just said is one of the reasons why everyone that are black or brown should support you, is because you're saying things that that Freeman definitely wouldn't say, or would pander enough to say. And I think that folks need to get to know you because they'll like you like I do and respect your ideals of how to bring change to the office. And I think that that's no doubt important. So now where can folks find you and help out if they want to donate, volunteer? Because we need to get you elected. So tell us how to help you out.
Yeah, I have a website, Mary, Mary, 4 FOR, Hennepin.com. And you can go on there, you can donate. There's some stuff about me. You can also volunteer. And one thing that I would encourage people to do is we have precinct caucuses coming up on February 1st. Yeah. And so it would be great if people would go to, well, I think they're going to be virtual. They haven't quite decided, but try to be delegates to the county convention, which is Saturday, May 14th. If you're a delegate to the county convention, then you can vote for me. I'm trying to get the DFL endorsement, and so I need votes for that. So that would be one way where you could help. And then as the weather gets better and after precinct caucuses, that kind of thing, we're going to be outdoor knocking. I'm going to be out a lot more when we can be outside, and when hopefully this COVID part, we can get past this, and we can be in community, talking in person. I do a lot of Zoom stuff right now, and I'm happy to do that, but obviously it's not the same as really being able to sit down with people and talk and actually listen to them.
Absolutely. No, because that's important. I appreciate you as chief public defender. I appreciate you now. I certainly strongly support you. And if there's anything that I can do to help you get elected, please don't hesitate to ask or let me know what to do so that we can get you elected.
Thank you.
Again, Mary, I think this is so important. You're always accessible, readily available. You speak your heart, and and a lot of times you use a lot of forethought before you answer. What you don't know, you say you don't know. Let me get back to you, things of that nature. And so we need that. We don't need someone that wears a nice shiny suit and that panders to a particular audience depending on the moment, right? The popular moment. We don't need someone that does that. We need someone that uses the law, respects the law, but also recognizes that sometimes the law, there are mistakes that were written in the law or the way that it's being used. We need to accept that, and I love that. So we strongly support you.
We thank you for being on, Mary, and there's a lot of other questions I'd love to have. Conversations. Right? I could probably talk for hours and hours. I fundamentally, I have some very strong disagreements with you, but I appreciate you coming on the show, being able to have candid conversations. I think this is what should happen. I think too often, I kind of tip my hat to you. I know you've been on the show before, but I think it's sometimes hard to get people that have such differing, opposing viewpoints, and I appreciate you being on the show, and would love to connect with you again later on in the campaign season and have some more conversations as well. So I appreciate you coming on the show, Mary.
I would be very interested in hearing your disagreements, actually. And one thing, hearing more about it, I went on starting in July I probably talked to about 170 people around the county, and it was just a listening tour. What do you want to see in the next county attorney? So I'm really interested in listening to people. And the final thing I'll say is I'm not a politician. I'm not running for anything else. And I try to be very authentic. And I think what this office really needs is a county attorney that is transparent with policies and is public or accountable for what they do, and also in the community, listening to people. And I think that that's been lacking. And I think just being out there explaining why decisions are made and why they aren't made, and just listening to people, because people are very angry, they're very frustrated, and they have a right to have the ear of their elected county attorney. And so that's something that I would do as county attorney, but I will continue to do during this campaign.
Damn right. Thank you, Mary. Go
Thank
Mary.
you.
Vote Mary. We're gonna have you on several times. I'm gonna help promote you. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah,
have a
thank
great
you
evening.
so much. Definitely went a lot longer than I thought. But I just had all these questions because, again, there's this mindset that I'm always curious and trying to understand and explore, and I don't get a chance to talk to John Troy. I can just listen to his press conference and have all these questions. But I know that, like I said earlier in the show, we're getting closer, and we're going to go a little bit long. But there was a press conference earlier today, and you had Mayor Carter and Mayor Fry that said we're coming together, and we want to ensure that COVID, that we get a wrangle on it. And so they implemented vaccine passport style, where when you're going to a restaurant, to a bar, any place that serves food and drink, I believe, Tevin, I think, has a story to pull up, but you have to be able to either provide proof of vaccination or a negative antigen test within the last 72 hours. So,
well, but listen, I don't get what your guys' problem with that is. You're vaccinated, so you have proof. What's the problem with, I always laugh at Republicans when I hear you guys dislike things, because you're the party that wants IDs for voters, okay? But yet you don't want to show a card to get into a place that shows you don't have this sometimes deadly disease. But you want somebody to go show identification to vote their right. You don't have a right to go into a bar. You can be the owner can specify specific people and specific rules that he only wants in his or her bar.
So here's the thing. We actually see it from the exact opposite. We think that voting, while is a right, should be the most secure thing that you do. So requiring an ID to be able to prove that you are who you are and that you live where you live, so we can have an open and honest election versus
we always do.
Going to a restaurant, which again has nothing to do with our security.
It does. It absolutely does.
It does not.
Number one, someone can come in there, like most crazy lone shooters, or someone coming in with the disease and giving a disease purposefully because he or she doesn't want to wear a mask.
Showing your ID doesn't help negate that at all.
It's you guys always. You guys want it both ways. It's just crazy, depending on the situation.
We just want it the opposite way that you want it.
No, you can't demand that I show ID to vote, but then say, I don't want to show you my identification. I don't want to show you proof that I'm not ill. Well, wait a minute. How do you even square the two?
Because one's security.
They're both security. I have a right for you not to come around me, making me sick.
What restaurant you go has nothing to do with who's going to vote and what laws are going to be passed that impact your everyday life.
Here you go.
And we want to make sure that the people that are voting should be voting. Okay. But let's we're talking
about COVID. You're swinging it to the voter. I'm just making the point of how you guys want it both ways.
And I'm saying that we see it the opposite way that you see it. We want security, which is why we want identification when you vote.
So do those business owners that want
the business owners don't want this. This is the mayor that wants this.
So does the business. No, there are some. Come on now. There are some.
It's the mayor.
No, I read the articles. There are some.
There are some, but they can implement it themselves. They don't have to have the city. A business right now can say, in order to come into my business, you have to show proof of vaccination. You can do that as a business right now. Nothing is stopping you from doing that. The point is, and my question is to you, when you say Republicans get up in arms about this, forcing this mandate, like what's the purpose of it? Can you tell me what the purpose of the mandate is?
Yeah.
What?
To keep folks from dying from this deadly disease. I don't get
To
what
keep them
part of
from
that.
dying.
Yeah.
Like who?
I don't get what y'all don't get about that. These sometimes we've talked about. I say this all the time, AK. Sometimes there are laws ordinances, all those things that sometimes have to protect people from themselves. Seriously.
But if that's your intention, right? I'm not saying you specifically, but the intention of this mandate, then those people will still die if they don't go to a restaurant because they don't get vaccinated because they don't want to go to a restaurant. Here's how I see it.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
but then don't bring, again, as I say, I say it with sarcasm, but I mean it. Then don't bring your sick ass into my establishment infecting other people. I've given you the example how just last year there was an article, and it was all factual, that there were 22 different cases of COVID out of one Minneapolis, North Minneapolis bar. 22 different cases. So that means 22 people could have possibly infected all those people in that bar that night, and then all those people in the bar went back to their communities, affecting more. You want to stop that. You want to stop the spread of this disease.
How are you going to stop that by asking for a vaccine ID when
because then I don't want you
Ocasio-Cortez,
I don't want you in.
who's boosted and vaxxed, just tested positive? There's literally a lady that I know, her downstairs neighbor, who's again double vaxxed and boosted, just tested positive. That's the thing. That's what doesn't make sense. If we knew that the fully vaccinated couldn't catch COVID or spread it,
we've always known that they don't. So what do you mean?
But I'm saying
we've always known that fully vaccinated people can still get it.
So you can have 100 people going to a bar. They all show that they're vaccinated, and they can still spread it.
They're less likely to have it. They're less likely.
That's
to be.
not true anymore.
No,
that data has changed. It's not about less likely anymore.
Fauci was just testifying against it the other day. So was the CDC lady just yesterday, and we know that it does stop the spread because
it doesn't stop the spread. It doesn't.
It does stop the spread.
It doesn't stop the spread.
It does stop the spread.
Slow it, but slow it by how much? I don't know.
Slow up enough.
In Ireland, 94%.
I don't care about those foreigners.
No, I'm just saying in the country of Ireland, okay, 94% of the adult population are fully vaccinated. Okay. Right now, they have one of the highest COVID-19 positive cases. So that means fully vaccinated people are getting COVID and spreading it to other fully vaccinated people. Now, I understand your point about reducing death, but the death part has nothing to do with going into a restaurant, because the people at home that decide I'm not gonna go get vaccinated, they're still going to die. So that's what I understand about what this does. Because here's what I think it does: it's meant to make people have to say either my life's going to be more difficult or go get vaccinated. So it's coercing people, and that's my problem with it.
Oh yeah, we're coercing people to go get vaccinated. It's your choice, right?
It is,
but it's also the choices of local government and businesses. Some businesses, sure, those businesses that you say that aren't happy with the fact that they're being mandated to ask their patrons to show their card. These are the same businesses that recommend you strongly to wear your mask when you come in. So again, don't bring me that, because I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you tell me to wear my mask in your establishment, then what's wrong with going the extra mile with saying, okay, because again, I told you, I was at a dinner about 4 weeks ago, at the Capri Theater. When I first walked in, the first thing they asked me for was my vaccination card, and I did a triple take, okay. It's on my phone. Showed it to her. That's cool. So here's the thing. I haven't gotten the text, and you had to write down, they did contract traces. So I have not received a text or email saying that any one of those people that I ate around, and there were, I don't know the number, but there were quite a few folks in there. I haven't received an email saying that either one of us has contracted COVID or anything of that nature, because we were all vaccinated. No one was able to come in.
That's literally not even how it works.
Oh, okay.
I've never got a single call from any place that I visited before they asked. Yeah, but here's another aspect, right? This is something that's important to you. You care about racial disparity, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Tevin, I sent you an image showing that as of it was like mid of December,
we know we know that there's a low percentage of black folks that are vaccinated,
Hispanic,
and Republicans,
Native American.
And you know what? And you and I have talked about that.
What does that look like though at the restaurant? You go in the restaurant and there's black people are being told you can't go in at a higher rate than white people.
Because this ain't 1961. They're not telling just more black folks.
No, I'm just saying that's what actually happens though, because there's less black people. So on average, right? Take a look, okay? This shows fully vaccinated. Okay, in Minnesota, 54% of blacks, 49% of Native Americans, 73% of Asian Americans, 57% of Hispanics, 30% of multiracial, which is super weird, right? If you're like me, you're biracial.
That's your kind. That's your folks.
And then 64% of white. So I'm just saying that's another aspect that in Minneapolis, St. Paul, which we agree has a larger percentage of black people than probably any other city in all of Minnesota, there's less people that are fully vaccinated, which means that they're not going to be able to participate as much.
Well, I think eat at home. I mean, I don't care just because there are black folks that at 54%. Stay your ass at home. I don't care what color you are. Stay your sick ass at home. Stay your sick ass at home. If don't come around me infecting me,
but the
I ain't
people
gonna come around you
going to
infecting
the
you.
restaurant can also be sick and be fully vaccinated and get you sick.
This is why businesses tell their staff, don't come to work sick. Because guess what? The next thing you know, watch now that in this year, the next following years, the percentages of lawsuits of people suing these owners and the state and all of that because I contracted COVID that I can't get rid of out of your establishment. And then when you watch these moms and pop businesses that you guys love so much go down because they're bankrupt, then what? We're trying to save you guys from yourselves. Listen, I'm going to say it again. I'll say it again. I don't care what color you are. If you're sick, stay at home. We know, and you and I have talked about this. I'm going to say this because it's time to rip my paper. Black folks and brown folks just have a strong distrust of government. That's why that number, but because we know nationwide the number of vaccinated black folks is higher than that here in Minnesota, or Minneapolis. It was at 41%. It was at 42%. Of black folks.
Yeah.
It is. I said it's lower.
Oh, okay. You're saying,
than it is here. So I'm happy to see that 54% number. That's great here. When the national number is lower, but we know the national number is lower simply because of hundreds of years of government distrust, i.e., the Tuskegee experiment, i.e., what goes on right now. So it's not. It's the fact it's not the vaccination per se or whether it helps or contracts you, because we've always been transparent. Well, not we ain't no scientists, but they've been transparent with the fact that they say that, look, if you get vaccinated, yes, you can get it. The folks that kill me too, that those that have gotten it before and think that they can't get it again. I have antibodies inside of me. I can't get it again. Well, yeah, you can. Government has said, scientists have said if you're vaccinated, you can get it again. You just, hopefully, if you don't have an underlying condition, you're less likely to be hospitalized, as sick. You had it as a vaccinated person. Mm-hmm. You said out of your own mouth, you said, I think if I hadn't have been vaccinated, I'd have been way off. It sounded like you were just congested. You had a cold. Mm-hmm. You were good. You still, you weren't leaving the house, but you were good,
this
right?
Has never been, in my opinion, the honest conversation. This isn't about whether or not you're saying vaccines work or not. I know there are people that believe that vaccines don't work. That's to me nonsensical. Vaccines do work.
Thank you.
The question is, who should be getting vaccinated, right? And then secondly, you have a choice. And that's where I stand. I'm a freedom over everything guy. If you decide that you don't want to get vaccinated and you're high risk, that's your choice.
Right.
But you shouldn't have to be a second-class citizen. And that's why I think Minneapolis, St. Paul, moving along with Chicago, Seattle, all these other cities, man, I think it's bad business. I think the impact is black people are even further segregated from society, which it blows my mind that people like yourself don't even think that that's an aspect. Like Black Lives Matter in New York, they came out against the mandates and said, look at all the black people that can't go out to the restaurant, go to the gym, doing all this stuff.
I see these black folks at the restaurants that I patronize all the damn time.
You won't anymore.
Oh, yes, you will. Because 54% of them are vaccinated.
Yeah. I guess fair. Maybe the 54% that are going to the restaurant are.
Okay.
But yeah, man, I know that we didn't get specifically to the questions. My cell phone died. I can't actually read the comments. I know comments were coming through that we put up on the board. We thank you, everybody. I know that Don Ackerman had thrown out, please talk about this, and we did. There was a question that was thrown out asking about whether or not, getting tough on crime is important, and I think that Moriarty had some answers on that, answers that I disagree with. But thank you, everybody, for commenting. Make sure that you visit our Linktree /BRBD so you can get connected with our Patreon account, get connected with our TikTok, our Instagram account. and just really have a chance to kind of see what we're doing and where we're moving around. I also want to thank our two sponsors. Just Imagine, located in St. Paul, has the newest, freshest gear for men and women. Please check out justimagine651.com. Go visit a store over in St. Paul. And also the WeberMart. If you're over in Minneapolis area and you need some convenience items, please stop by the WeberMart. I know that today's show was a little bit discombobulated. We had the show before us, ran a little bit longer. But next week we have 2 in-studio guests. So it's going to be a good show. So please tune in next week.
Because fireworks will be all over the place.
Because it's going to be 3 people on the right and just Jamar over here. And it's going to be four highly melanated gentlemen.
And don't worry about me. With 3 conservatives in the room, I'll eat them like I do Cheerios. I'm Jamar.
I'm AK Kamara.
See y'all next week.
Peace.